Hello, everybody. Welcome to Snap Take. I'm Glazer of the Snap Judgments Podcast, the official podcast of Marvel Snap Zone. And speaking of that podcast, we just got finished recording this week's episode. We had both Bootman and Bradsifer on, so we had a podcast crossover. But in true podcast crossover fashion, we had a super huge special guest. If you don't know who it is, I'm not telling you who it is. You're just going to have to wait for it to go up on the Marvel Snaps on YouTube and all your podcatchers to find out. Make sure you sub here as well. Here, we give you all the best decks before your favorite content creators can get to them. It's new card day, and as is tradition here, we're going to talk about the new card. That is Spider-Ham. Spider-Ham is a 1/1 that, on reveal, transforms the highest cost card in your opponent's hand into a pig, keeping its power as cost. As far as we're aware, this card will show both you and the opponent what is it, which is fantastic both informationally and in terms of planning out your game. Basically, a single target highest thing leech effect. It tells you whether you want to bounce it, so on. All right. Before we get to the decks I'm going to tell you about today, first off, on Marvel Snap Zone, Dan wrote the article this week. It's new decks with the new card, a bunch of Spider-Ham decks. Make sure you check it out. It's a bunch of great decks. In that article is the really obvious deck. The really obvious deck is the bounce deck. Fundamentally, what you do is you take the bounce deck from yesterday's video, that Lambie deck, or from like 30 days ago's video when we talked about the Wobolos deck, and you pull Iceman out. And in Iceman's place, you put Spider-Ham in, and you go to town. It's so obvious. Look, I'm sure eventually someone's going to have like a bajillion win rate with the deck, and I'll have to cover it. But like, you get it. It's so simple. We're good, right? Let's instead look at some other homes for Spider-Ham. Again, as is tradition, we're going to look at a Safety Blade deck. Safety Blade, if you don't know, is a Marvel Snap Zone writer, and he is a genius. He is responsible for many of the best decks in the game. Here, he has decided to make this thing that I did not see coming at all with Spider-Ham. It is a bounce, Devil Dino, Infinite, Agent deck. What? Okay. First things first, this deck has an obvious bounce game plan. Why is it running Kitty Pryde? Because Kitty Pryde is arguably the best card in the game. Our special guest thinks Kitty is the best card in the game. I'm not sure if I disagree. Kitty Pryde every turn is a bonus to the collector. Other ways to increase the power of the collector are Maria Hill and Agent Coulson in this deck. The cards that Hill and Coulson generate, at least the cards that Coulson generates, maybe the card that Hill generates, are cheaper because of Quinjet in the deck, which is really, really helpful. Nebula is just a really powerful card. There's very little reason not to run her. You stick her in a spot, you get some control over where your opponent plays. Lady Sif is phenomenal. If it hits Infinite, you can Lady Sif Ghost Rider and build your own Infinite combo. That's also perfectly fine to do with Devil Dino. And Maria Hill and Agent Coulson have the added benefit of adding cards to your hand, making that dinosaur better. Dinosaur costing 5 is your top end because you're never really playing Infinite, with one exception. A last turn of both Devil Dino and Kitty Pryde is quite the powerful last turn. You could also play Dino on 5 and play Shanga and Kitty on the last turn just fine. Infinite is there to be discarded by Lady Sif. Infinite is also there because, well, Spider-Ham is in the game, and for at least a couple days, everyone who can afford this first in the game series for release is going to be playing him. If people are playing Spider-Ham, they're hitting Infinite. Infinite is now a 620 without any text. He can be played just fine. It's obviously the best stats you're going to get 90% of the time on that last turn. So make sure you check it out. You also have an added benefit of this deck from Maria Hill and Agent Coulson in that your opponent can't plan around you. Once they know your deck, especially in Conquest mode, opponents know how to attack your hand, what to do. Well, Coulson and Hill throw a monkey wrench into that reasonably well. This deck has a lot of lines and a lot of power. It's really cool. And you know how we knew it was going to be really cool? Because Safety is a genius. The next two decks are my builds. This is my I don't want to talk about that one yet. I want to talk about this one first. This is to Infinite and be Ham. Get it? It's a verbal pun. This deck is built off Nerf Herder's deck. Nerf Herder had a deck that was running fundamentally a high evolutionary package, along with Kitty, Magic, Taskmaster, She-Hulk, and Shuri. I decided to add a few extra pieces to this. I added Infinite and Moon Girl to try and sort things out. It's got a bunch of really, really nice one drops to play that gain power sort of passively, besides Kitty, who's more actively, and Spider Ham to mess up your opponents. Iceman is also just really good to mess up your opponents. All of these cards make Angela a really, really great add. You often don't want many of these cards late, but Moon Girl makes that a better proposition where you can drop a couple, pass some turns. Um, if you've been bouncing Kitty, getting a already 4-6 power Kitty back, or two of her is really, really great. On turn 4, you're basically choosing to play a bunch of cheaper stuff or Shuri. If you play Shuri, you have multiple options. You can pass into She-Hulk and Taskmaster. You can pass into just a gigantic Infinite if a lane is somehow locked up in one. Like if you've managed to get Nebula into a Storm lane, for example, and you're just going to take that over Nebula and Sunspot. You can, at that point, just drop something last turn like Taskmaster and Kitty. You can drop She-Hulk and Kitty and plenty of other cards for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing, if you don't play Shuri, is you can play Magic on the last turn. At that point, you can skip turn 6 and then just play She-Hulk and Infinite on the last turn. You can also play She-Hulk and Taskmaster, et cetera, et cetera. There's a million different play lines. All are extremely powerful. The Taskmaster giving you the ability to double up whatever you end up Shurying is extraordinarily powerful. You can even on turn 5, I think my favorite thing to do on turn 5 is Shuri Kitty. Kitty bounces back to hand, gets even more power. On turn 6 or 7, I guess, whatever, you play Kitty and then Taskmaster after. And you're just putting so much power on the board. Opponents are going to have a really hard time stopping you. This deck is obviously weak to wave, but not as weak to wave as you might think, because once you know they have wave, you just magic on 5. They wave on 5, and then you can go to town. You just ignore that turn, and you should be just fine because you're going to go bigger than the turn of the game. There's some vulnerability to Shang-Chi, but you are very, very often basically not going to have priority because you're playing so little early. Most of your power in this deck is coming late, and there's some vulnerability to Killmonger. Killmonger is actually the biggest problem here. You'd really like to hit that with Iceman or make sure that Kitty is not in play, but your Nebula and Sunspot are going to get hit. Say Levy. All right, that's this deck. The last deck is my favorite. All right. What Am I is a Marvel Snap player who played a version of this deck to the top of, I want to say, a Snap Fan tournament. It might have been a Snap Battlezone tournament, but one of the two, to the top of one of those tournaments. The deck has since fallen out of favor. There, a lot of new cards came out, and it was kind of forgotten. Well, let's bring it back. This deck was sick, and it should be even better now. This is a much cleaner deck than the last one. It is much weaker to wave, which is its big problem, and a little weaker to Killmonger, but not really. It's basically on turn 4 deciding between a Moon Girl into like skip double She-Hulk or a Beast to bring a bunch of things back. At that point, you're basically going off. Most of the plays are similar. Ideally, on the last turn of the game, you're dropping something even without Moon Girl, like a Kitty Pryde, a cheap She-Hulk, and a Hit Monkey. If you can pull those off with Mysterio, you just won the game, right? Like, that's insanely powerful. You've got Carnage to clean up a bunch of mess. You'll note no Angela. Angela's the card I most want in this deck, but I couldn't quite fit. You'll note no Angela or Bishop here, which was like the big innovation when this deck first happened. But both Carnage and Beast clean up that hood. They also clean up your extra Mysterio clones in excellent fashion. And Carnage and Beast are both great for Spider-Ham, our brand new card. A lot of what messes this deck up is things like Wave, which you don't have a good answer for, which is the big weakness. America Chavez could easily be Magic if you feel like that's a big enough concern. There's nothing else that really gives this too much trouble. It's a really, really, really strong deck. You're a little bit weak to Shang-Chi, but again, it's easy to throw priority. And a lot of decks that run Shang are going to have Shang as their highest cost card in the middle of the game, and Spider-Ham will do a great job of nuking that, especially in Sarah decks, because 4 is the second highest cost thing in Sarah decks. So like you're gonna hit Shang-Chi an awful lot with that Spider-Ham in that Sarah matchup. All right, those are our Spider-Ham decks for the day. I'm gonna get off and go buy me a new card. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy. See you tomorrow for another Snap Take. Peace, fellas.